Wuppertal, a city that floats. This is Wuppertal, a city in western Germany between Cologne and Dortmund, stretched along a narrow river valley where geography has always dictated what could be built, and where one of the strangest pieces of urban infrastructure in Europe still carries people to work every day. Here, the train does not run through the city, it hangs above it. The Wuppertal Schwebebahn was built in 1901, not as a futuristic experiment, but as a practical response to a city that had run out of space at ground level, boxed in by steep hills, dense housing, factories, and a polluted river. Instead of bulldozing entire neighborhoods to force a conventional railway through, the city chose a solution that now looks visionary, but at the time was simply an act of engineering pragmatism. Wuppertal is not postcard Germany. There are no medieval squares and no polished tourist centers. What you see instead is a dense industrial city stitched together by rail lines, bridges, housing blocks, factories, and a river that still carries the scars of a century of industrial use. For more than 100 years, the Schwebebahn has floated above the Wupper, carrying millions of passengers through a city that grew too fast, too densely, and too unevenly to ever be properly planned. This is not a museum piece pretending to be transport. It is everyday infrastructure, still shaping how people move and how the city holds together. Like many industrial cities, Wuppertal was hit hard by deindustrialization. Factories closed, jobs disappeared, the population shrank. And by the 1990s, parts of the city were no longer just declining, but structurally broken. What followed was not spectacular. Old industrial buildings were reused instead of demolished. Abandoned railway lines were turned into green corridors, and neighborhoods were renovated slowly and unevenly, because there was neither the money nor the political appetite for radical transformation. Projects like the Nordbahntrasse did not solve Wuppertal's problems, but they stitched fragments of the city back together and created public space where none existed. Wuppertal is also a city shaped by migration. More than a third of its residents have a migration background, and migrant communities from Turkey, the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and more recently Syria, filled the economic and demographic gaps left behind by industrial decline. Migration did not ruin Wuppertal. It kept it alive. But that survival came with inequality, housing pressure, and spatial segregation that are still written into specific neighborhoods the Schwebebahn passes over every day. The difference is that Wuppertal did not freeze in decline. It used those pressures as a reason to adapt. Through reuse, rather than erasure, through incremental regeneration, rather than spectacle, and through civic initiatives, rather than top-down megaprojects, the city began to reassemble itself. The Schwebebahn is not just a train. It is a moving cross-section of the city's social and spatial reality, sliding over renovated quarters, immigrant neighborhoods, former industrial zones, and new civic projects that exist side by side. It connects what used to be fragmented. Urban planning is often sold as a story of progress and shiny futures. Wuppertal tells a different one. It shows what happens when cities regenerate through reused infrastructure, bottom-up initiatives, migration, and decisions made under constraint rather than ideal conditions. Sometimes good urbanism is not about being visionary. Sometimes it is about being pragmatic, patient, and smart enough to build on what already works. This is Wuppertal, a city that floats, and a city that learned how to reinvent itself.